President Trump's Secretary of Homeland Security established her credibility with Congress a year and a half ago when she said this.
Norway is a predominantly white country, isn't it?
I actually do not know that, sir.
So the Secretary of Homeland Security with the Scandinavian last name does not know that all of the countries in Scandinavia are predominantly white. She's not that stupid. She just doesn't think you have to tell the truth to Congress. And so no one should have been surprised today when she refused to call a cage a cage.
Just yes or no, are we still putting children in cages?
To my knowledge, CBP never purposely put a child in a cage, if you mean a cage like this.
Purposely or whatever, are we putting children in cages as of today?
Children are processed at the border facility stations that you've been at. Some of the
And I've seen the cages. I just want you to admit that the cages exist.
Sir, they're not cages.
What is a chain link fence enclosed into a chamber on a concrete floor represent to you? Is that a cage?
It's a detention space, ma'am.
Does it differ from the cages you put your dogs in when you let them stay outside? Is it different?
Yes.
In what sense?
It's larger. It has facilities. It provides room to sit, to stand, to lay down.
So did my dog's cage.
In that same hearing in the House Homeland Security Committee, Congresswoman Nanette Barragan of California said this.
You said that you waited to give direction on how to implement the zero tolerance policy because you wanted to do it with compassion. Do you know how outrageous that sounds? You wanted to separate children and families, and you wanted to do it with compassion. So in the meantime, you didn't do anything at all, and you let kids be separated without tracking them. Do you know how outrageous that is, Madam Secretary? You have no feeling, no compassion, no empathy here.
In the Senate Judiciary Committee today, Senator Kamala Harris got one of the most inhumane, not my job answers ever given in a Senate hearing. The Trump official who disgraced himself in that hearing was Kevin McAleenan, the Commissioner of Customs and Border Protection.
Last week, the Justice Department reported that the Office of Refugee Resettlement received 4,556 allegations of sexual abuse or harassment of immigrant children in their custody between October of 2014 and July of 2018. 178 of these allegations were against staff of shelters where the children were placed. I understand that HHS personnel, of course, do not fall under your direct authority, but your agency is nonetheless handing over these children to HHS. Do you believe that you have any duty to raise a flag of concern that when you transfer these children to another agency, that they may not be safe?
I believe that's the duty of the management and leadership of Health and Human Services, their Inspector General, or the White House, or Congress, not mine.
Not his job. Joining us now, Maria Teresa Kumar, the president and CEO of Voto Latino and an MSNBC contributor, and Jason Johnson, politics editor at TheRoot.com and professor of politics and media at Morgan State University. He's also an MSNBC political analyst. And Maria Teresa, I wanted to get your reaction to, actually, you can pick whatever you just saw in what we introduced to react to any or all of it.
I think, Lawrence, the fact that these individuals are not being held accountable for what they are doing to these children is atrocious, but it also shows the consequences of elections. The American people spoke in November, and now you actually have oversight. If you recall, about a year ago, we had 6 months ago, we had very similar conversations with Secretary Nielsen, where she was rolling her eyes and didn't seem to care, and now this is where literally the rubber hits the road, and she should care. Just today, the Trump administration finally admitted that there was over 471 group of parents that have been separated from their children, that were deported without their children, without their consent. 471, Lawrence. This is on our watch. We also know that the United Nations has declared that what we are doing, putting children in cages, is in the direct violation of universal rights of children. The fact that we have over 60 children that are still separated from their parents not only is talking to the disservice that this government is doing to these children, but more importantly, the trauma they're going to suffer as a result result of it. And that is based on tons of studies by the American Pediatric Society. And finally, but not least, we are creating and exacerbating a problem that did not exist. To remind a lot of the viewers, there was an actual program in Central America that allowed children to present themselves at U.S. embassies to be reunified with their families. That was done under the Obama administration. And one of the first things that the Trump administration did when they basically created their budget in 2017 was zero that out.
Jason, I saw the cages at the southern border when I was down there, and no one disputed it. The people working there, they didn't dispute that these chain link containment compartments inside these buildings were cages. They didn't have a problem with that description of what was there. They could tell you why it was set up that way and budget and all sorts of reasons, but they weren't fighting you on what you were seeing with your own eyes.
Yeah, it's like calling a prison, adult condos, right? Like, this is the kind of nonsense that we're dealing with. And Lawrence, what really offends me about this is, what is it about Republican administrations where we're dragged into these asinine, immoral conversations to justify behavior that anybody with common sense and two eyeballs knows is wrong? Under the Bush administration, we had to argue what's actually torture. We know what torture is. Torture is something that nobody wants to deal with. We know waterboarding is torture, but we literally had to have discussions about what is torture. We now literally have the head of Homeland Security and members of this administration trying to get us to debate as to what a cage is. We all know what cages is, whether you have a dog or not. So I'm very happy that we finally have Democrats who are doing their job in oversight. But what I really want to see and what's important is, now that these people have been shamed, what can we do? What can the voters do? What will voters do this fall and in 2020 to get these people out of office? Because I don't want to be having these conversations in another 2 or 3 years when we've lost more children, when more children have been sexually abused, and when organizations like DHS and Border Security and ICE can completely hide what kind of damage they've done to these kids because they don't have to give that information to the public.
And Maria Teresa, in the Senate, we saw Kevin McAleenan, a name that should live in infamy, incapable of even expressing concern for children sexually abused who were in his custody once he's transferred them to another bureaucratic custody within the structure of the Trump administration. As soon as they're out of his control, he couldn't even express concern about what happens to them after that.
Well, I think the fact that you're putting children in cages, that you have babies in cages, that you're okay with children being sexually abused because it's not under, quote unquote, above his pay grade, demonstrates how desensitized this administration is to the fault of children based solely on their race. And that is the only way that you can justify what is happening, because it is a completely racist policy. If it was any other person's child, this would not be, no one would be alarmed. We as Americans should be not only outraged, but we should be in front of those detention centers every single day until every single family is reunified. The fact that in Tornillo, which is under his preview, Tornillo, it was the first internment camp for children. They basically waived background checks for the people that were going to work in those detention centers, and those are government employees.
And we have new polling from Quinnipiac showing that 66% disapprove of President Trump's use of emergency powers to fund the border wall. And Jason, that just happens to be exactly the percentage you need in the Senate and the House to override a presidential veto. It's very clear the Senate is going to vote to disapprove of the president's emergency declaration, and we just don't know exactly how big the vote will be, and then whether there will be enough in the House and Senate to override a veto.
Well, and that's the real question, Lawrence. We know the president's very likely to veto it. Does the Senate, do the Republicans have enough backbone? Do they have enough moral spine to say, look, we will even override the president's veto? This is a stain on the entire American government, not just Republicans, but anybody who is remotely associated with this should be embarrassed. We could all be dragged in front of the Hague for engaging in this kind of behavior, and I'm not using hyperbole when I say that sort of thing. And I really hope that in the future, that not only do they think about what this vote means, but Mitch McConnell and some of these people, they have got to talk to this president and say, look, these are the kinds of moral decisions that should be made at the top, and you shouldn't be putting this on Congress at all, because the wall and this policy make no sense.
Jason Johnson and Maria Teresa Kumar, thank you both for joining us tonight. Appreciate it.